Well, I'll make a start. I think most of you are on mute at the moment, which is generally a good idea for feedback and all the rest of it. But we're quite a small group today, so please feel free to unmute yourselves. If you can't do that, put something in the chat box and I'll do that for you. And if you've got a question or a point that you want to raise, then please feel free to do that. We have, I think, a combination of members registered for today and some guests. Pleased to say that Fiona Aldridge is here already from the Learning and Work Institute, and they are going to take the majority of the webinar today and talk us through a really good and really important report which has just come out. So we'll hear from the Learning and Work Institute shortly. We've also got guests Rekin, Rostrum Search, and from our membership Taurus, who are the chair of Communities That Work, Magenta, Vestia, Stockport, Southern, Futures, Wythenshawe, can see you there, Nathan, Wythenshawe Community Housing Group, Your Housing, Radian, and Notting Hill Genesis. So we've got a few guests hopefully joining us, and if not, we can share the recording. So I'll just give a really brief update, I suppose, from the work that's been going on this week and the headlines from that. We had a ministerial roundtable on Monday afternoon, which worked, thank goodness. The tech worked and my Wi-Fi didn't drop out. Hooray, hurrah. So we had two ministers on that call, the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Welfare Delivery, and both at the DWP. And we had 1 hour with them. It was sort of split into two halves, the meeting. The first half was to hear from sort of a regionally representative collection of our members, and that was typically chief execs or a director here or there, to give a sense of what's going on, what's happening on the ground, and how housing associations are adapting their services, and how there's a focus, if and how there's a focus on employment support and what tenants and residents are saying. So ministers were really keen to hear and understand what's actually happening, and I think they felt that they were slightly lacking that intelligence, so we did that. And in the second half we heard from them about some of their plans, some of their challenges, and we sort of began to gently lobby really the role of Communities That Work and of housing generally, sectorally, in supporting them and working with them to start to address some of the major employment challenges which are with us now and which are growing. All of us, I'm sure, have started to see the change in tone in headlines and on the news about the economic crisis and the workforce and workplace crisis, which is sort of moving into centre stage as the health crisis is managed, still there but managed. So the employment one feels a little bit less managed, I think, at the moment. So we had a really good conversation. We followed that up with direct contact with DWP officials regularly. So we had another DWP official meeting yesterday, and we're starting to progress some of those asks. We've got, through the Housing and Employment Task Force, some clear areas that we're trying to push for now. And support the DWP in, and we'll share those across the membership now. We'll put them in the next news shot and on our website, but they're about partnership working, they're about commissioning and understanding the role of housing in a commissioning environment. They include Jobs Plus, which is a popular scheme that Communities That Work and GUAC before it we're trying to push for. And protecting youth and supporting the young unemployed, who are probably most vulnerable at the moment. I'm pleased to say that the National Housing Federation both were on the ministerial roundtable. Their chief exec, Kate Henderson, joined us, and are also working with their members, who obviously we share a membership, but they have a wider membership, and they're looking at coronavirus, the social and economic recovery. And they've started to engage members around that. And I'm pleased to say, and I think a brief paper that they shared last week, the recommendations from our task force, the Housing and Employment Task Force, are embedded in their early work and in their draft about what they think they should do and what they should recommend that housing and employment services do together. So that's really good. It shows synergy and some join up. So I'm really pleased about that. And we'll get this information sort of shared so you can see as a membership what we're doing. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Do use the chat boxes for saying hello. Thanks to those that already have. And I think at this stage I will unmute and invite Stephen Evans to join us, who has just arrived hot-footed from one meeting to another, I do believe, to join us this morning. And we know this is just a quick meeting, but it's still time, and we're grateful for Stephen giving it. So Stephen's the Chief Exec of the Learning and Work Institute. And I'm hoping, Stephen, that I might make you a co-host. See if you can join us on your screen. If not, then Fiona, please jump in. If you're there.
No, I'm definitely here if you can hear me. Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I'll go on mute in a sec, Stephen, and put everyone else on mute. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've had a chance to a quick cup of tea between meetings. This is a regular weekly catch-up that we do with Communities at Work members and invited guests. And I'm really pleased that Learning and Work Institute are here. Just so you know, Stephen, we're recording this one so that we can share it more widely afterwards as well. We'll stick that on YouTube, and we'll allow, if we can, I'll keep an eye on the chat box for people who want to ask any quick questions of you or have any comments. But over to you to describe the work for, in the report that launched, was it Monday this week? Tuesday, called Help Wanted, which is a nice throwback to an old school job advert in a shop window, is it not? So Stephen, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you now.
Great, thanks Lindsay. So there you go, thank you. I've just started speaking, you've already, hang on.
Yeah, it's fine.
Is that okay? Sorry,
Yeah.
It keeps telling me I'm muted.
So yeah, you're fine.
You can edit this out of the recording, right, to make me look vaguely competent. So a little bit of background, and then I'll just say what the report focuses on, and then try and just say a little bit about what we're doing off the back of it as well. And hopefully, Lindsay, I'm not sure if you sent out the link, but if not, we can definitely send out the link to the full report after this discussion. So I think there's been lots of reports done by lots of people about the impacts of the coronavirus thus far on the labour market, and starting to think about ideas about what do we do. In fact, there's been an exponential growth in reports, as well as the use of the word unprecedented. And we've done some of those as well, so we're part of this. But I guess what we felt was that there was a risk that there was so many reports out there, there was a bit of a cacophony. And actually, if you're sat in a government department or a local authority or wherever, there's a sense about, well, I can't read all of this stuff, and what am I supposed to do with it anyway? So what we did is we gathered together a group, and we tried to make it a small group of labour market experts and groups working on this sort of stuff, and policymakers as well. So that includes the Institute for Employment Studies and Reform and Centre for Social Justice, and URSA and others as well, just to try and share experiences about what we'd found so far, and see if we could come together and agree a sort of, we don't have to agree about every single thing, but agree a broad set of priorities that we thought the government and others should be focused on. And then hopefully that would be helpful for officials and for commissioners and for those delivering services and everybody else, as well as the sort of individual reports we're all producing. So it's not meant to be a sort of very formal task force whereby we're all going to agree the following 5 things, and then we shall only say the following 5 things, and none of us will do anything else. So it's not that. I was also conscious that as well as the exponential growth in reports, there's been an exponential growth in groups. So again, I was trying to not duplicate, but also not attempt to join up every single group that's going on, not least because it's difficult to keep track of all of them. So there's some consistency in membership in asks with the youth employment group that Impetus have set up, and with the housing and employment task force that Lindsay has established, which I'm on as well, and some of those other things. Again, you'll have to try and edit out my phone going off there in the background. Apologies for that. So yeah, so that's kind of why we were doing it, and this came together in the Help Wanted report that was published on Tuesday, and that we've also been sharing privately with officials in Number 10 and the Treasury and DWP and DFE. And I guess what the report was trying to do is say, I mean, first of all, stating the obvious in the sense that there's been a massive and immediate impact on the labour market of the virus and the social distancing measures taken as a result of it. That includes a sort of sevenfold increase in universal credit claims at the peak, and some eye-watering numbers of people applying, over 2.5 million, I think, individuals applying for universal credit during March and April. Vacancies falling by about 2/3, I think, across the economy, back to levels last seen in the mid-1990s. And then those up to 8 million now workers who are furloughed, which actually has prevented the rise in unemployment being even more catastrophic. So been a sharper rise in all of those measures, or a larger rise and a quicker rise in all those measures compared to 2008. And 2008 was pretty bad, right? There was a kind of gathering together of some of that analysis, and then 5 priorities identified in terms of tackling, or what the government and others should be looking to do. So the first was about withdrawing emergency support like the coronavirus job retention scheme. So the Learning and Work Institute, we published a report on that a few weeks ago, and that called for the scheme to be extended to the end of October, I think, and reformed to allow part-time working for furloughed workers, and also thinking about targeting on particular firms or sectors most hit as well. So you start to sort of taper and target. And then think beyond October, if it's still needed, because we've still got some rules in place, do you tie it to things like paying the living wage or good work standards, or things like that? So what we said in the report as well was you need to think about, not all of those furloughed workers are going to go back to their jobs, because of A, we'll still have some social distancing in place, and B, the economy is just going to be different compared to what it was before the crisis. So we should probably start thinking about that now, and get support for those furloughed workers to build their skills, to start applying for other jobs, to learn from responses to redundancy that we've had from DWP before, and things like, Rover and all of that. Thomas Cook more recently, things like that. So there's a kind of that, what we do about that emergency support. But we didn't major on that because there's sort of lots of immediate things going on about that, and the Chancellor's going to say more next week. I guess it's the next 3 that are probably the biggest ones from my perspective. So the first was about back to work support for those who are newly unemployed. So unemployment is probably about 3 million probably now. I mean, the figure's always a bit out of date, but that's probably what it is. And so it will have more than doubled, if not trebled, since before the crisis. And DWP rightly got all of its work coaches and all of its staff focused on processing those universal credit claims, and I think did an amazing job about turning those around, and the amount paid on time. We can discuss what on time means and whether we're happy with that, but the fact that the whole system didn't crash is amazing. But we're now 3 months almost, or 10 weeks I think, into lockdown and that spike in unemployment, and we're only just starting to turn those work coaches back to job support. And actually job support needs to mean something a bit different, given we're not really allowed out our houses, and recruitment has dropped by as much as I said it had. So we know that just leaving people unemployed and not even asking them what they're doing, or pointing them towards vacancies that do still exist, or helping them build their skills or whatever, we know that's disastrous. We tried that in the 80s and it didn't work very well, and they end up long-term unemployed, and then even when the economy comes back, they don't. So we need to get that support there now, which we think means, yes, getting Job Centre Plus back on it, but also what about recruitment agencies and others, which we harnessed in 2008? Why don't we have that sort of little flotillas, if you like, and that probably requires some local coordinating action. You can't do all of that from the centre, but we just need to get on with it. It's 10 weeks into lockdown. So that was the second point. Third point was about the already long-term unemployed. So again, refer back to the 80s, where we came out of that recession with the the already long-term unemployed were now very long-term unemployed, and we ended up with lots of early retirement and lots of other stuff. And again, that wasn't a great triumph, and it took us 10 years plus to deal with that. So we need to be looking now at how we scale up support for the long-term unemployed, which includes, I would argue, and the report argues, how do we scale up existing provision that's already out there? You know, an ODU procurement process will take 6 months, and it'll take another 3 months to ramp up. And by that stage, you know, if you think how quickly or how much has changed in the last 2 months, think ahead 9 to 12 months, which it would take to do that a new procurement. So why don't we scale up the good stuff we've already got, whether it's contracted by DWP or not, and that includes provision by housing associations. So I think there's some interest in DWP around discussions that are going on now about a round table on Monday, I think, wasn't it, with MIMS that you had. But it is 10 weeks into lockdown, 10 weeks. We built a hospital in 9 days. So we just need to get on with it a little bit, I would say, at this stage. This is my Friday frustration now. You're getting the bulk of this, I'm afraid. But we do need to get on with it. And then the fourth bit was about young people. So in any recession, unemployment for young people spikes up more quickly. It tends to drop down more quickly as well. This might be different because the sort of sectors that young people tend to go into disproportionately are those that are shut down for social distancing. So will it bounce back like it usually does, given that those social distancing rules will be in place for some time? Don't know. Plus, even though it does drop down, a period of unemployment when young is disastrous for your long-term job and career prospects. So we should do all we can to avoid it. And it's better to overreact than to underreact. And this requires a joined up offer from the education and the employment sides, which is where some of us have spent many years writing reports about why that should happen and why it hasn't. But why don't we guarantee all people, all young people leaving education over this summer, a job or training offer, and then put a massive effort into doing that? But don't forget about the 18 to 24-year-olds who've already left education and may be out of work. It feels to me like we risk a massive spike in NEET numbers if we don't get on with an offer now for those young people. Now, we said that should be a joint education and training and work offer. Apprenticeships are going to go off a cliff, but aren't apprenticeships a great way to combine learning with earning? So why don't we push for more apprenticeships for young people, which were too low to start with, and now we're going to fall even further. And we did say that it should be backed up by a jobs guarantee as well, based on or learning the lessons and drawing conclusions from the Future Jobs Fund that operated during the last recession, to say for those who can't find work, we need to create some work for them. And I think there's a link there into the jobs of the future. And for example, if we were going to retrofit or massively increase solar installation in social housing, for example, well, that would be a good thing to do for our low carbon targets. It would also create a bunch of jobs that we could potentially link young people and others out of work into. So I think there's a point about joining up that economic development, future industrial strategy, and how do we link people out of work towards it now, which is the fifth point in the report, really, which is about building for the future. So we need to just get on with stuff now, but we need to have an eye to the future, which is about the industrial strategy, about those environmental goals, for example, and about the fact that we were pretty poor on level 3 qualification attainment for young people to start with. So why don't we link up trying to do better on that with getting those young people back to work as quickly as possible? So that's kind of a very quick sort of skim through. I guess next steps for us. So the reason I was a couple of minutes late is because I was on the next meeting of that group that's put together that report, and we were sharing sort of experiences, I guess. And I guess there's kind of, so we're going to carry on talking and carry on trying to have that consistency of conversation with officials from central and local government and others, and anything that we can do to sort of disseminate those messages, or actually to alter what we're saying based on your experiences and feedback, and for us all to work together to try and make something happen, we're really keen to do. It feels like we are going to get some announcements in the next couple of weeks, probably, possibly, who knows, but particularly around young people. I guess from my perspective, the sort of there's kind of what they're going to do, but there's also scale of ambition and speed of response. And I think I've said several times, we just need to get on with it. And that definitely applies to all of those items. So and kind of come back to any of those points. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to just talk the whole time. But hopefully that gives you a sense about what we did, why we did it, and what we're doing with it now. I'll stop there, Lindsay.
It does. Thank you, Stephen. And I will invite any questions and comments. And I've got a couple of my own, but I'll just hold back in case colleagues want to jump in.
I've got a comment, really. I think that this whole concept of building for the future is absolutely critical. So the housing sector, has obviously been seen as part of a key response to economic recovery after this. You know, a number of us have got Homes England moves around large-scale development programmes, and we really need to accelerate that. But I can't emphasise the importance of not detaching the social economic recovery that needs to go hand in hand with the building element. And I suppose mine would be an ask is trying to lobby to make sure that we don't get that disconnection, because it comes all too easy, doesn't it, about it becoming about building homes, but actually we've got to help, you know, like you say, that building for the future around the lives and the recovery. So I think that's absolutely, I love that phrase, the building for the future, and but with that social slant. That was great, so thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And we agree with that. And a member of our task force is Lord Kerslake, Bob Kerslake, Chair of Peabody, former head of the Civil Service and General Champion of Housing. And he obviously speaks a lot to quite senior colleagues in housing. And I think they're saying the same, and trying to drive the government's hand to promise rebuild and restart of the housing economy, contingent to some extent on it going with community rebuild skills and proper community regen, and we'll see who blinks first in that particular game, but that is going on, and we hope as well, and we know that the NatFed are pushing for that as well. So it feels like there's genuine join up between all these groups that Stephen mentioned, and with the NatFed and colleagues. So we hope that bears fruit.
Lindsay, can I just add a point to that?
Yeah.
I think this is an important point. So this is kind of partly what I was referring to in terms of the challenges we had coming into it and using this crisis to help tackle them, but also then the kind of linking that onto the building for the future point. So before this crisis started, we had 9 million adults across England with low literacy or numeracy, which is rubbish. And it had been the case for, well, as far back as the surveys go. And the number of adults taking adult basic skills classes, which was low to start with, had fallen by a third over the last 5 years. We now have 8 million furloughed employees. Probably 20 to 40% of them are going to have low basic skills. This would be quite a good time to do something about that, right? And yet the scale of the ambition isn't quite there. And then also, I remember back when the Nightingale hospitals were first being built, and you know, it's great news that we haven't needed to use them as much as we feared, but it's right to prepare. I remember there were furloughed cabin crew were going in to help some people help with various tasks in those Nightingale hospitals. Now that's a kind of short and immediate example of that sort of mass scale matching, if you like, to say we've got a bunch of people who are either furloughed and can't work and may not be able to come back to their previous jobs, and we've got probably now 3 million unemployed people. There is still recruitment going on, and we should link people to jobs where we can, but there's also a massive social need, whether that's building housing, but actually immediate social need for people, and volunteering helps to improve people's skills and long-term employability as well. So why can't we put those things together? And that probably requires a bit of a national framework, but also local leadership. I know there's lots of examples of this starting to go on already, but you know, what can housing associations do? What can local government do? What can we all do to work together? It feels like it needs a big collaborative effort, and we need the infrastructure for that partnership.
Yeah, agreed, totally. I'll use my chair's privilege, if I can, to ask you a question, Stephen. You mentioned, we broadly agree with all of the recommendations in help Help Wanted in that report, and of course we've tweeted the link, but we'll share it again with members and make sure it's a good, easy read, and it makes a lot of sense, and it pulls together many other reports. So, you know, we recommend it, of course. But it matches a lot of what we say and goes beyond what we say in the Housing and Employment Task Force recommendations. So that's all good. You mentioned that you think both the Chancellor and other parts of government are going to start making announcements in the next couple of weeks, so into early June. I just wondered what your bets were really on what they're going to say first, second and third. What do you think they're going to announce? How close do you think it'll get to the recommendations that you've put in Help Wanted in that report, if you were feeling positive about that?
Well, they'll get closer to those recommendations if we all keep saying the same things to the sort of as broad a group as people as possible. So certainly I'd say to everybody on this call that if you do agree, obviously only if you agree, then anything you can do to reiterate those messages to any MPs or councillors or minister or whatever, I think we just need to sort of keep reiterating the messages really. I mean, I think when the coronavirus job retention scheme was extended a couple of weeks ago, I think the Chancellor said that, I think it was by the end of the month, he was going to talk about what it would look like from August to October, and that will include the rules around part-time, but also some degree of employer contribution. And I'm not sure if that'll be for everybody or just for non-lockdown sectors. So it feels like that announcement is likely, no matter how general. I think the Chancellor's generally done the right thing on it, but that announcement is going to spark off plans for redundancy in some firms, because even if he keeps no employer contribution for lockdown sectors because they've got no income to contribute, some of those furloughed staff in non-lockdown sectors, the employer will start to think, well, hang on, is that job really coming back? And some of them will, but some of them won't. So you will get another spike in unemployment, basically. Plus, you've then got all those young people who are going to start hitting the jobs market, because effectively their schooling or their education, because this is universities and colleges and schools, has finished, and they'll get their exam results, or their qualification results, in due course. So you've got those two points at which we're going to see the question to the Chancellor and the government is, well, what are you doing about those two things? So that's why I mentioned young people, and that's why I'm sure there'll be something around linking those furloughed staff onto new jobs and the unemployed people we've got now. I guess my worry is that we will lack a bit of scale of ambition and speed of action, and so that's kind of what I think we all need to push on. And the risk is it's a DWP initiative and a DFE initiative, whereas, to go back to the previous question, or previous discussion, it needs to be a collaborative thing, a partnership thing, not just I shall contract you to do the following outputs. So that's kind of my sense of direction and where I would like personally to push it a bit further.
Good, that's great. Thank you, Stephen. Unless there are any other, chat box is fine. Has anyone got any closing comments? If not, then we say thank you to Stephen. That's really helpful, really informative run through of where you are. I think the phrase of the day is just get on with it. So if you see anyone, just say that to them. They might be a politician, you never know.
Yeah,
just get
but maybe not in the shop though. We need to be careful.
No, that would be mean. Yes, enjoy your queues for the supermarkets this weekend. The motorways won't have giant bank holiday traffic on. How exciting! Other than that, have a lovely 3 days off, which I hope most of you are having soon. And Stephen, thanks ever so much. We've stayed working closely with you, so thank you for your time this morning. And it's midday, so we'll say goodbye, farewell, and see you all next week. Thanks, guys.